everyone, it's Jeff the IT guy. Hope y'all are doing well. Today we're going to look at, this is the Lenovo T7i. This is the finished sort of upgrade that we've done to it. So we've upgraded it, right? Or a lot of the components in it. We left the power supply, the case, and the CPU and the GPU. But this was to look to see what kind of performance or aesthetics we could get by upgrading it, and also to see if it was worth it. And so this machine, has an i7 10700K. It came with a 3060, 8 gigs of RAM, 650 watt power supply, a Z490 motherboard, and it had an air cooler as well as a 512 gig NVMe SSD. That's what its stock configuration was. And I believe it was either $1599 or $1699. I want to say it was $1699 for the stock configuration. And so what we did was we upgraded it, right? We put in a new motherboard, and this is the MSI Z490 Gaming Edge Wi-Fi. We put in an H100i Capellix AIO, which is a water cooler. We upgraded all the fans to Corsair SP120 Elite RGBs, I believe is what they're called. And we put in a new RAM, for example. So this is Corsair Vengeance Pro RGB RAM, 16 gigs, running in a 2x8 configuration instead of the 1x8 configuration that the stock came with. Now the reason that we upgraded the motherboard is so that we could get XMP, and also so that we could put an air cooler in it. And so, like I said, we want to figure out if it was worth it, right? So if we took a $1,600 or $1,700 pre-built like this one, and we put about $500 worth of upgrades into it. And so we can talk price. Let's talk price about the components, and then we'll get into the actual performance gains and everything that we made. So the motherboard is about $200. So that's for the Z490 Gaming Edge Wi-Fi from MSI. It's about $200. The cooler, which is the Corsair H100i Capellix, is $140. So that's a 240 millimeter AIO. The RAM, you're looking at about $80 to $90, depending on where you get it. And that's for 16 gigs of 3200 megahertz Corsair Vengeance Pro RGB DDR4 RAM. And then the fans are going to be about $80. And that's for the Corsair SP120 RGB. You could, of course, if you didn't want RGB, you could go with cheaper fans. You could go with like the Noctua Reduxes, which are going to be about $15 each. And so you could save some money there. You'd save, because we replaced the front three and the one in the rear, which would be $60. So you'd save about $20. You could also go with a different motherboard, a different AIO. I just went with these because they all work really well together. The Capellix includes the RGB Commander Pro, which can handle all of the fans in here. And so you can also use Corsair iQ to control all the RGB and everything. And so it gives you a really good package. Let's talk stock performance, and then we'll get into the performance after upgrades. And we'll talk, we'll get to the conclusion, which is, was it worth it or not? So for this machine in its stock configuration, without doing any upgrades to it, it took 4 minutes and 15 seconds to do a 48-minute 1080p video, and it took 8 minutes and 2 seconds to do about a 14-minute 4K video. That's to render it in Adobe Premiere Pro. For Borderlands 3 are on high for both 1080 and 1440 is what we'll look at for Borderlands. So Borderlands 3 high was 1080 on 1080p, had an average of 83.42 FPS. On 1440p, it had an average of 51.27. For Godfall, looking at it at 1080p, had an average of 66.9 FPS. Black Ops Cold War on high settings at 1080p, you're looking at around 150 FPS, but it would dip. Okay? And then for Fortnite at 1080p, high settings, you're looking at 140 FPS. Also, the CPU ran at about 75 degrees when playing games, and it had an all-core clock of 4.7 gigahertz, but it would fluctuate depending on how high the temperatures went. And so that's how Intel's Turbo Boost works. So we would see a high of 4.7 across everything, but you would see it dip, go up and down. Okay, this GPU would hit about 1900 megahertz on the core, and so the temperature on it would be anywhere between 66 and like 70, give or take, is where it would hang out. Sometimes it would go hotter. It just really depended on how fast the fans were spinning in the stock configuration. So it also would jump up and down because it's dependent on temperature as well. So after doing all of the upgrades, let's talk about performance. So after doing all the upgrades for a 49-minute 4K video in Premiere Pro that's rendering it out, it took 12 minutes and 29 seconds. So let's talk about that just for a second. Stock configuration, it took 8 minutes for a 13-minute 4K video. After upgrading it, it took 12 minutes for a 49-minute. So we added 4 minutes to our render time, but the video length was over 3 times as long. So it done a lot more work in that amount of time. Let's talk about temps real quick, and then we'll get into gaming. So for temps on the CPU, looking at about 61 degrees. So that was our average. Our average was about 61. No, I'm sorry. I lied to you. Our high was about 61. So the high for this was about 61 degrees on the CPU. So that's about a 13-degree difference for the highs. Anywhere between 13 and 20 degree difference for the highs. And their lows was about 50. So it stayed about 50 most of the time, in the 50s instead of being in the 70s. So we're looking at about a 20-degree difference. What that meant, though, in terms of performance, is that our all-core clock would actually stay at 4.7 gigahertz longer, so you wouldn't see that fluctuation like you would previously with stock, but it would also go all the way up to 4.8. And so you would see it in certain scenarios hitting 4.8 gigahertz versus 4.7, but it would also stay at 4.7 longer. This motherboard does, of course, offer overclocking as well. As far as the GPU goes, you would see about 2000 megahertz versus 1900 megahertz. So you would see about 100 megahertz difference because it's much cooler with the upgraded fans and everything. So let's talk about performance. With performance, we're no longer looking at 1080p. We're looking at 1440p now. So Borderlands 3 at 1440p gave us 71 FPS average. So if we look at stock was 51, and then upgrading it gave us 20 extra FPS for 71. So we're looking at 71. Godfall, we've switched up to 1440p now. We had an average of about 74, 75 FPS. It's actually 74. So 74 FPS at 1440p compared to 66 at 1080p. And so 1440p is a much harder resolution to drive than 1080p. And so instead of just sticking to 1080p and seeing some up, we're actually going up in resolution, and we're also seeing higher frames at a higher resolution, which is really cool. The ones that y'all really care about, Black Ops Cold War, we're playing at 1440p now, high settings. We're looking at 150 FPS constantly. Like it doesn't dip below that 150 FPS mark hardly ever, and when it does, you're still staying above 144 FPS. So that's really cool. That's a lot of performance gain, especially if you're in the first-person shooters like Black Ops Cold War. For Fortnite, we've went up to 1440p now. We're no longer at 1080p. We're up at 1440p. We're at epic settings, and we are consistently hitting 144 FPS pretty much most of the time. And so you are going to see some dips, of course. You're also going to see it go higher. And so the average is 144. That means it can dip, maybe 130, 120, something like that. But it's also going to jump up to 160. Now, of course, you can lock your frame rate at 144 FPS if that's what your monitor is, and it won't jump as high, but it will try and hit that 144 FPS consistently. And if you've got G-Sync, then whenever it does dip below that, you're not really going to notice it. And so it's conclusion time. Was it worth it? Is it worth it to you to go through this process of upgrading this computer? To me, 1000% it is worth it. I mean, we're talking some pretty good performance gains. You know, just in the same resolution, we're looking at 20 FPS. I've known people, you know, I mean, there's a big jump between going to like a 3060 to a 3070, you know, and or one video card to another for 10 FPS. You know, it could be hundreds of dollars. It could be, you know, even more than that for 20 FPS, you know. So we're talking about a pretty big difference here. And really the only thing we did was we set it up to where it does more work more efficiently and it does it quicker, but it also sets up an upgrade path that you didn't previously have. And so with this, you're able to upgrade your RAM now and use XMP instead of not being able to with the stock motherboard. With this, you can overclock your 10700K. If you want to go to a 10900K, you could. If you wanted to update the BIOS and go to an 11700K or an 11900K, you can do that. You have that option now since you've upgraded the motherboard, which is going to give you more performance. And that's really what this is setting up. We're taking this base, this platform, as I'm going to call it. This is like our, our platform, our base, our foundation. We'll call this Prebuilt our foundation, and we're going up. We're using this Prebuilt as a foundation to build upon, because given the world the way it is right now, it's very hard to find parts. But if you can find something like this, and you put a couple $100 extra into it, well, then you're going to get, more than a couple $100 extra of performance actually, which is really cool. And so to me, it's 1000% worth it. Now you have to be the judge of that for you though. Is it worth it to you to buy this, to upgrade it, spend a couple $100 and then, get that performance gain like you've seen with this? But it is a good foundation, a good platform to build off of. It increases, like I said, your chances to upgrade in the future. If you want to go to 64 gigs of RAM, if you want to go to higher RAM speeds, a different processor, you could upgrade the power supply. You can do a lot of different things with this that you couldn't do previously if you left it in its stock configuration. So I want to thank you all for watching this video. I hope it's been helpful to you and that you've learned a lot from it. I hope it's been entertaining as well, getting to see this whole series of how we upgrade this and where we go, and making sure it was worth it and everything like that. Stay tuned, because what we're going to do is we're going to compare this to something like an SI or a system integrator build, maybe something like NZXT or something like that, and see if it's actually better to go with this and upgrade it, or if it's better to go with a system integrator. And we're just going to look and see what the price to performance ratio would be. Say you have a $2,200 budget, which is about what this would be, versus like a $2,200 budget with one of the SIs. As always, thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. I love to hear from you in the comments. I hope you have a great day. If you need anything, just let me know. All the links for all the parts and stuff will be in the description. And as always, keep it real and don't forget to subscribe.